Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of TBR Tackle, where we tackle my TBR 3 books at a time. This is the first video in this series that I'm going to be bringing to you guys, and the idea behind this is that I will be reading 3 books based on some sort of a selection criteria. Now, I have a few already in mind, but definitely feel free to comment down below with some ideas that you might have for some random selections that I could do based on my TBR. Some of them might work for my TBR, some of them might not. But so if you guys have been following me on my channel, you might know that I have a goal of reaching a 0 TBR. It's not going to happen this year. It's hopefully going to happen next year. So for that TBR tackle, I have been putting some books, of course, on my TBRs every single month, but I do also want to, from time to time, just take a sort of different approach to what I'm putting on my TBR. So not just based off of what I'm most intrigued to read, but just really having some sort of a random selection to avoid ending up with like the books that I'm less interested in down the line. I've made quite a strict selection of my TBR at the end of last year. I'm pretty convinced that I want to read everything on those shelves. There may be a couple of there on there that by the end of this year I might decide that I'm going to unhaul rather than read, but in principle I want to read all of these, but it's definitely the case that for some of them I have less of excitement than I do for others, and so this is a way for me to avoid keeping those on my shelves forever. But so what's the first TBR tackle? In this first TBR tackle, we are tackling the books that I got in my Books That Matter subscription box. So I will have the details linked down below, but Books That Matter is a UK subscription box. I took a 6-month subscription off of them, and I've definitely been enjoying them. I have decided to quit that subscription service at this point in time just because of my TBR tackle. So I don't want to be adding a book to my TBR every single month that I cannot even choose myself, when I've got this sort of strict system in place that makes it so that I have barely bought anything this year so far because of this whole goal of reducing my TBR. So it would be kind of counterproductive to continue with the TBR subscription at this point in time. So I have had it for 6 months, and so in the 6 months I've received 6 books, actually 7, because one of them had 2 books in there. And so off of those I've read 4. One of those I had actually read before I received the subscription box. But so I have 3 left, which is perfect for my TBR tackle. So let's get on down and talk about the TBR. So for my TBR for this TBR tackle, I have 3 books on there. First one is The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. That was the first one, actually. I got that one. That's the one that I got in my September box. Then in the December box, I got Delayed Rays of a Star by Amanda Lee Coe. This is actually also available on Script for you guys who have a Script subscription. So it is available as an ebook on Script. And then the final one that I have on here is the most recent one. This is the February box, and that is The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo. So I also have already read a Bernardine Evaristo. I read Girl, Woman, Other, the winner of the Booker Prize 2019. Absolutely adored that book. And so I don't think it wasn't a 5-star for me because there were certain things that I didn't like. But I still very much enjoyed that book, and so I was eager to dive into another Bernardine Evaristo. And so that's also why I was happy with that subscription box, because would I have picked up another Bernardine Evaristo so soon? Maybe not, because of all of those books that are on those shelves. But so now I do have that opportunity to dive into another one. This is set in London in 211 AD, and I don't know actually too much more about it. I think it has to do with a sort of slave girl who is involved with an emperor, but I really don't know too much about it. In any case, I'm dying to read it, and this is probably the first one I'm going to be tackling, because it is, since a few minutes now, it has the basically readathon has started. So this is a readathon that Brit from the channel Basically Brit organizes every once in a while, and so it is a 24-hour readathon. So this one's starting at 12 o'clock today. It ends at 12 o'clock tomorrow. And so my idea is to try and get at least one of these done within this readathon. Hopefully get quite a way through a second one, and potentially even finishing a second one. That way I can potentially finish this video within the month of March and get it to you, maybe even within the month of March or in the month of April. So hoping that that will work out. But so I'm going to be starting with The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo, and so I'll check in with you guys later when I actually know a little bit more about the premise of this book and can give you a little bit more details about it. Alright, so it is about 6 o'clock. I have read 170 pages already in The Emperor's Babe. So it's going really fast, and part of the reason is because it is a book written in verse. I didn't actually notice, I clearly hadn't looked inside yet of the book. But so it's a book written in verse, and I don't really remember the premise I gave you, but it really wasn't that accurate. But so basically, we have our protagonist. Her name is Zuleika, and so she has Nubian heritage. She is a black woman in London in 211 AD, and she catches the attention of a sort of like Roman noble. Do we call them noblemen in Roman times? In any case, a rich Roman notices her and she catches his attention, and so he wants her for a wife, and so she becomes his wife, but he is most of the time he's off to Rome or to some far off place to help maintain the peace there. So a lot of the time she's kept to herself. She's very much just kept in a sort of like gilded cage, kept to herself, kept away from the outside. And so it is a book written in verse. I love it so far, and I'm really flying through it as well. But it's also had like a beautiful quote here somewhere that I'm going to be reading out to you guys. So it says, I want to be on fire, I want to burn, I want to be consumed. I've been dead since my wedding night. I've been living inside myself for years. I want to feel extreme pain and extreme pleasure. I want to risk death, because then I'll risk living. Really drives it home, Buffy, when you put like a nice meow at the end of that. But I'm gonna say like let me interpret Buffy's meow as being like, whoa, great quote. So I've really been enjoying it. So we are 6 hours into the readathon at this point in time. I've read 170 pages. I will definitely be able to finish this one, possibly tonight. It is 250 pages long, so that's some 80 pages more. I do think that I might stop reading at some point tonight. So not to say that I've been reading nonstop, you know. I've basically been reading for an hour, and then I've been playing The Sims, sadly enough, usually also for an hour, and then reading for an hour again. So I have definitely been flying through this a lot quicker than 170 pages over 6 hours. It's just that I haven't been reading for 6 hours. But so I'm currently very much back into a sort of like Sims mood. So I knew that this was going to happen. I knew that I was going to want to play The Sims during this weekend as well. And since none of these books are available on script on audio, I wasn't going to be able to combine them. But so I've managed to contain my Sims habits quite a bit. So I did get through quite a little. Oh, so I did get through quite some pages already of this. But so tonight it is also gymnastics, and my favorite team is playing. I support UCLA, by the way. And the last 2 weeks I haven't watched them live, and the game hasn't gone up until like a week later or even 2 weeks later. So tonight I am going to try and catch the live show, like the live screening of their game, in order to prevent having to wait for it another week or 2 weeks or something like that. So that's going to cut into my reading time a little bit.
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not.
So it is 8:30 and I finished The Emperor's Babe. So basically, after 8.5 hours of the readathon, I finished my first book. I'm very happy with that, because that means that I can still get a little bit of reading in today and tomorrow, and so that perhaps I could still finish the second book, though I will say that this is definitely the shortest one, especially since it's also one written in verse. So I can perhaps get quite some way into the second one, but I don't think I probably won't finish it. But so in any case, The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo. I liked it a lot. I don't think it's for everybody. So it's written in verse, as I said, and I very much like that. Though it also has like a mix of like it has quite some poetry to it as well, because our protagonist gets educated through her new circumstances of being married to a rich guy, and she discovers poetry and starts writing poetry for herself. Now, me and poetry don't always get along, though I will say that the poetry that was used here, I could understand a lot more than I do usual poetry, because it was, it was poetry in the context of the story, and so you could see how it related to what was happening to the protagonist. But the language overall, I really enjoyed it, but at times it did also confuse me, and I wasn't always fully following. Also because it is kind of a mix of like it's a mix of just plain English with Latin, with then sort of like colloquial Latin, I guess, and then colloquial like Scottish, for example, in there as well. So sometimes that was confusing, or like more difficult to get through. I also liked it talking about fame and fortune, about how she starts off from nowhere, just wanting her freedom, just enjoying life as she is known it. But through education, through her circumstances rising, she becomes more ambitious, and so and that I definitely liked it talking about as well. I also like the sort of like mixture of this book being about Londinium in the year 211. So we're looking at this very ancient setting, and this whole mixture with Latin and things like that definitely feeds into that ancient setting. But from time to time, it reads very modern, and so we'll have inclusions of like, at some point, it's talking about protesters, for example, and then it uses these sort of like chants like 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want blah blah blah. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but so it uses like regular modern day chants that people would do that I don't think are exactly the same way that they did it in like the year 211, or it will be talking like street language the way it is these days, for example. So I did definitely think that that was an interesting mix. It's not there for a whole lot, so it doesn't get like annoying, that mix of modern and ancient, but it is a nice nod here and there. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like it's one of those, I think it's gonna like land on a 4 stars, just because I did definitely enjoy it. But it's also not one that's, I'll ever reread, or that I'm easily going to recommend to other people, just because it was good. And that's it.
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not defined. Won't you kiss me? Won't you play? Won't you judge me? Ain't no way I could deny you. I could try.
Good morning, guys. So it's 8 o'clock in the morning. My alarm clock went off at 7. I was actually quite awake, but I did spend like an hour on social media or something. But so I'm about ready to dive back into my second book. So don't think I updated you on which book was going to be the second one. So yesterday I started Delayed Race of a Star by Amanda Lee Coe. I will already say that it's a lot slower pace to get through. I just think that there's a lot more on a page, which of course makes sense because the other one was written in verse and this one isn't. But even so, the pages are like filled to the brim, it seems, and you know, layout wise, there isn't much space between chapters, for example. And so it's a slower paced one in that sense. There are also, at least in one of the perspectives, a lot longer sentences that sometimes I have to read over multiple times. So it's definitely not finishing, especially since I only have 4 hours left and I'm like very near the beginning. So I've finished the first 25 pages or so. And so we are following these 3 stars, as I said in the beginning, but I actually only know Marlene Dietrich, so I can only really talk about her. Hopefully I'll have a little bit more information by the time that I update you guys later at the end of this sort of like readathon clip. But so we're following these 3 stars, and so the book actually opens to a scene of them actually meeting. So that picture that I showed in an earlier clip is like a picture from the archives of some party that they all three attended. And so it starts from that scene, kind of describing it from each of their perspectives. And then we're going to dive into each perspectives for a longer period in different chapters, for example. So the first big part of that at the moment is Marlene Dietrich in her 80s, living very much in isolation in an apartment in Paris. All of her sort of like wealth has gone because the French government is basically paying for her living costs, is paying for her apartment, is paying for a maid to come once a week in order to help keep her apartment clean, keep Marlene Dietrich's body clean because she is bedridden at that point in time. So it's interesting to look at a figure like Marlene Dietrich from that sort of period in her life. I don't know whether we're going to go into other periods of her life or whether we're going to go into the heydays of her fame or something like that. But so far, I'm enjoying it, but I haven't had that hook into the story yet. I am not like falling in love with the characters or anything like that yet. But as I said, I'm like 25 pages in. This book is like just under 400 pages, so yeah, I cannot really judge at this point in time yet. But so let me continue on with that one, and then hopefully I'll get a nice chunk of the way in still today. Definitely not going to be even near the midway point of this book, but I'll still be happy if I get like a decent chunk of it done now. So I think at this point in time, I'm gonna try and not to take any sort of like Sims breaks because I just have 4 hours left, and so I'll just like try to fit in as much of this as possible. I still need to take some sort of a breaks, but my Sims breaks just get too long, so I'll just see what else I'll do for a break. But so in about 4 minutes or something like that, the live show is going to start on Brit's Instagram. So the final hour of the basically readathon, she's doing another sort of sprinting session, but in all fairness, it's probably not going to have a whole lot of reading anymore. Maybe there'll be like 2 10-minute sprints in there or something like that, maybe even three. But so I am currently page 70 of Delayed Rays of a Star, and I've definitely found my groove with this one. I'm definitely flying through it a lot more now. Mind you, it's still slower paced than the other one because it does have a lot more on a single page, but I've definitely been enjoying a lot. I will say that like the Marlene Dietrich part, I wasn't necessarily super intrigued about the Marlene Dietrich part herself, but so as I said, she was granted like a maid to take care of her once a week, and her maid is actually a Chinese refugee, and so we also get her story, of her story of the move to Paris and how it was actually basically all a scam because when she arrived, she was kind of forced into prostitution by the people who had gotten her to Paris under sort of false pretenses of having factory work for her at the end of the line. And her story I actually found more intriguing. And so the second part of this novel is from the perspective of the Chinese American actress that is in here. I actually don't know her full name. Amy May Wong. I have never heard of her. I don't know whether she's just somebody reclaimed from history in this book or whether she is more well known perhaps in America, for example. But I'm really enjoying her storyline. So that is very much about, it's also a Chinese character, but this one is like second generation. Do you call it second generation or is it third? So it's not her father who emigrated to the US, but it's her grandfather who emigrated to the US. She herself does not know any Chinese. She knows how to count to 10, for example, in Chinese, and that's about it. But when she is going, so it's a lot about her encountering casual racism all of the time and all of these microaggressions. She is often commenting on the fact that people are always asking her about China and the Chinese way of life, even though she is not Chinese in the sense that she has never really been part of Chinese culture to that extent, and she doesn't know Chinese, for example. But how she just kind of embraces that at some point and just makes up these stories because that's easier than having to go through the entire story every single time of being like, hey, I actually don't know Chinese. I'm actually American mainly. You could ask me more about the history of America than you can ask me about the history of China, for example. I'm going to be leaving you guys for a bit and then joining the live stream of Brits. I don't know whether I'm going to update you still today about this book because I probably won't get much reading done anymore at that point in time. But so yeah, as all in all, I think it's still been a successful edition for the basically readathon. So I read 253 pages in The Emperor's Babe, and at this point, I'm 70 pages into The Late Race of a Star. It will get like, I don't know, maybe 20 pages more at most. So, hey guys, it is the 20th. It is Becca's Bookoplathon, and I am currently back on the Delayed Race of Stars reading. So, I am over the halfway mark at this point in time. So, we have been introduced to all three perspectives at this point in time. And I will say that I am not enjoying the perspective of Leni. Leni is apparently a German female director. I did not know this because the like one of the most famous sort of like German Nazi propaganda movies, Triumph of Will, was directed by a female director. I didn't know this, but so she is very much a career woman, a power woman, but I also just don't like reading from her perspective because I think it's an interesting story arc because it shows that she isn't just sort of like propaganda machine for Hitler. She isn't somebody who really supports his view or anything like that. Isn't a sort of like Nazi fanatic or anything like that, but she is, and it is nice to see a sort of power woman, but she is quite annoying also. So she's really annoying because she's a very self-centered character, which I mean, when we're looking at the movie industry, I guess there are more self-centered characters there than not sometimes, if we're gonna go stereotypically. And it's not like Marlene Dietrich, for example, isn't portrayed as being self-centered, but Lenny is a type of character who's self-centered and who's very jealous of others as well. So she has this resentments towards Marlene Dietrich, for example, for landing the role that she believed that she needed to land. And the way that she treats the people around her very much seems to be more like, they need to serve her rather than there being any sort of like genuine feeling for the people around her, while at the same time she's also kind of stalling production to make sure that the crew can stay there as long as possible, because if not they might need to be conscripted into the army. So there are interesting facets to her personality, but there's definitely a whole lot there that makes me go like, I don't care for you. I find her to be a very obnoxious character, and especially in the second storyline that I've had of her now, she's definitely had some thoughts that make me go like, yeah, okay. She just has very little empathy, and as a very empathetic person myself, she really rubs me the wrong way in that sense. So we have just gotten off of one of her parts again, and so we're going into Marlene Dietrich again. And I do prefer reading from the two other perspectives, though I do think that the storyline of Leni is probably one of the more interesting storylines within the story so far. So that's just my update for now, and let's just dive back into the reading. So I have finished The Delayed Race of a Star. I think it's somewhere between a 3 and a 4, but more on the 3 side, I think. It's kind of, I liked it. There were elements to it that are interesting, and I think it's got interesting story arcs, interesting characters. But something was just missing to these sort of like overall structures, because a lot of the time, so we were following mainly these three actresses who are linked to one another through a photograph that the author saw at one day. And so she tells the story of these three actresses, but she's also telling the stories of some people around them. And some of the more interesting characters to me were actually those side characters that we were meeting along the lines, and the stories that have happened with those characters. And when it came to the stories of the actresses themselves, something was missing, something to kind of tie it all together. But so altogether, it's very much a story about fame, about the difficulties of rising to fame as a woman, about the difficulties of maintaining image, about prejudices held against women in that profession, against, the whole sort of like image that you need to keep up, the age restrictions, these sort of like prejudices against people for their race, all of those things, all the difficult things that come into play when it comes to life in Hollywood. But when we are done looking at some of those other characters, we draw those things out of the Hollywood context and we see them as well in everyday life. And I liked it, but it's just like, it was just good. It wasn't exceptional for me. I don't know when I'm going to be picking up the third book in the secret TBR. I don't think it'll happen for Becca's Bookopathon because that is like a relatively long one that I haven't started yet. So with Delayed Race of a Star, it was also almost 400 pages, but I was already like 170 pages into it. So I don't think that I'll be able to fit in the third secret TBR book. But it is coming your way and it's coming right now. Hey guys, it is like 3 months later or something like that, I'm guessing. And I'm finally going to be updating this vlog because I'm finally reading the third book within this reading vlog. I've been like intending to do it every single month since March, right? When I read the first two ones in this particular TBR tackle. But I've just been like picking up other stuff or struggling to get my TBR around, thinking that I would have time later in the month when I didn't. So now I'm just going to start it already. And so third book within this TBR is going to be The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. I don't know too much about it. All I really know is that all I think I know is that it's centering around a family living in Istanbul, and there's some sort of a curse on the male members of this family, so it's mainly a female-centered story. And one of the female members of the family is returning from the US, and her return kind of has a big impact, I'm guessing. So not a whole lot that I know. I have read a previous Elif Shafak book. I have read 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak, which I read for the Booker Prize in 2019, I'm guessing. And I enjoyed that one, but I found that one to be disparate. There were like two, in my opinion, there were two very different styles to that book. And there was one that I enjoyed but struggled a little bit with in terms of pacing, and then there was one that I really enjoyed. So we'll have to see where this one falls into, and hopefully it'll be the latter, of course, because I definitely did see huge potential when it came to Elif Shafak's writing, and so hopefully this one will be like a full-out success for me. And we start off this story with one of these women as she is going through Istanbul, making her way through an appointment, and what we then find out is that the appointment is actually for an abortion. Now, I'm not gonna say too much more about the story. I do definitely like the writing style so far. Each chapter has like the name of a item of food, and then that item of food will appear throughout the chapter. This is very reminiscent of how she structured 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World, in which we had like chapters that had titles that referred to smells, and then throughout the chapter we figured out, like, or the chapter started with a smell. Don't really remember all that well, but so, and then throughout the chapter we would figure out what was so impactful about that smell, what memory was linked to that smell. And so, really like that sort of link between memory and food, or the prominence of food in literature. I always like it when books feature food heavily, especially as a way to get ingrained into a culture, for example, because food is such an important part of culture. So I'm really enjoying it so far, really enjoying the different perspectives, loving the writing style. It is quite a sort of like fragmentary story so far. We've had multiple chapters told from different perspectives, and each of these kind of have like they kind of sketch a scene. Is that how you say it? They kind of paint a picture, and these pictures are connected, but it isn't like it's telling a cohesive story. You're kind of given puzzle pieces that you need to fit together to some extent. But yeah, really enjoying it so far, and so yeah, I'll definitely be continuing on with this one, hoping to finish it this weekend. I had plans this weekend, but they ended up getting canceled because too many of my friends were getting sick. So yeah, it wasn't really worth it anymore to meet up, as well because it is going to be bad weather throughout the weekend, and so we cannot really meet up outside, and we still need to, kind of. So yeah, I'm going to be having more time throughout the weekend, so I'll definitely be able to finish it. As I said, I am 90 pages in. It is like 360 or something like that. I'll probably get to the 120 mark today.
I never think, I never know. I'm stuck and left alone. I've been lost, I've been fine. My cause is not defined. Won't you kiss me? Won't you play? Won't you just...
Hey guys, time for another update on the Bastard of Istanbul because I'm like some 70 pages out or something from the ending, and I'm really enjoying this a whole lot. You know, it is very much about sort of like colonizer colonized relationship, oppressors oppressed, and the sort of like different attitudes towards history to some extent as well. You know, how the oppressed basically only have their history to hang on to, and the oppressors are kind of just like very much willing to also oppress history, to also just forget about history, forget about what has happened. And that conversation then takes place concerning the Armenian genocide, which isn't necessarily considered a genocide world round. There is no consensus about it, apparently, because there is no sort of like fixed definition of what a genocide is. So people do all agree that atrocities happened towards the Armenian people, but apparently the term genocide is something that some academics agree on and some don't. But so Elif Shafak manages to discuss this conflict in a very nuanced way, in a very complex way, portraying the different emotions, the different attitudes towards this conflict without really it turning into sort of like, I think it could easily result in a sort of like black and white battle between the two sides. However, she's very much putting nuance to it, very much showing how, you know, neither of the attitudes towards this conflict are necessarily very healthy or are, you know, the answer. You know, the fact that this book is going to talk a whole lot about that conflict isn't necessarily clear from the get go, because it is only when it comes to the Armenians in this storyline that we really see this discussed a lot. You know, the Armenians were put through hell by the Turks in like the 1910s, 1920s, and a whole lot, there was a huge diaspora because a whole lot of Armenians had to flee the country, or, you know, were forced out of the country. The ones who survived, because they were put, as I said, literally through hell. I know nothing about this conflict beforehand, and I will say you don't necessarily know. You learn a few things about it, of course, throughout, but I would say that if you have no background knowledge, you might also want to, throughout reading this, look up some facts about the Armenian genocide, just so that you're able to place it a little bit better. But um, you know, so there was a huge Armenian diaspora, and so our character Armanush, she's part of the sort of like American Armenian community, and they very much have, you know, fixed ideas about Turks, and, you know, Turks are the enemy, Turks are evil, Turks are out to oppress all Armenians, and, you know, the Turks that they had left behind, the Turks that their the Turks that their grandparents had to escape from, is very much what they believe present day Turks to be like still. And so the whole book will delve into this thematic, and it does it in a very nuanced, complex way. So, not just saying, hey, oppressors just want to forget about everything and move on, and oppressed people cannot let go of the past. That's not just what it's saying. It is very nuanced, very complex, and I love the way it is this handling this thematic. And you know, yeah, I absolutely highly recommend it. Aside from that, there is a whole lot more to this story. I think the writing style is perfect. I love all of the sort of like scenes that are taking place between the different characters. All of the dialogue is really very well done, and, you know, the way that food is integrated also works very well for me. I always love food in literature basically, and whereas here the food doesn't necessarily have a central role, it becomes quite central due to the fact that each chapter is named after a food item. So when that food item then pops up within the chapter, that gets like extra prominence, and I really get you really get a sort of like feel of moving into that culture based around because of the food, and the food is basically also the one sort of like um shared element between the Armenians and the Turks because their cuisine basically is the same. And so, yeah, I really love that aspect to it. Aside from that, we also have sort of like discussions about belonging, discussions about identity, and about, and as I said, about history, about our relationship to history, about, you know, that sort of dynamic between history being a big part of your present, or on the opposite, kind of wanting to disregard history. And it talks a lot about that. But yeah, I really love it. I really love the way in which we have this story really challenging sort of like stereotypical views that some of these parties might have towards the other, that Armenians might have towards Turks, but also that Turks might have towards Armenians. And through the introduction of both of these to one another, we really see them challenging those views and readjusting their views on the other and the views on, their relationship to history, for example. So yeah, really loving it. I'm going to be continuing now. I don't know whether I'll have different final thoughts, but who knows? We'll just have to see, and you will see it sooner than I will. Alright guys, so I finished The Bastard of Istanbul and I really liked it. I mean, there definitely were parts of this, especially in the beginning, in which I, kind of found myself losing track or kind of found my mind wandering. But once we got to these sort of like different parts of the story connecting more, then I definitely started to be super engrossed and wanted to continue all the way through. I think from the midway point until the more or less the ending was really when I was most engrossed in this story and when I was most appreciative of this story. And at that point in time it became like a 5 star. It's not, maybe not like a 5 star in terms of like, is it solid throughout? Did I solidly enjoy every moment of my reading experience? But overall, I think it is one that, really stands out to me now, and that is the reason why it's gonna be like a 5 star read to me. Apart from the things that I've been saying about how it dives into, oppressor oppressed, our relationship to history, to our family's history, and all of those types of things. What I definitely also want to highlight is how great Elif Shafak is in her character work. I think, as I said earlier, Armanoush is an Armenian who has created certain ideas about what the Turks are like, and she's confronted with those ideas when she's confronted with those ideas when she's confronted with a real life Turkish family. What I definitely feel like is that I, as a reader, also have my ideas about what Turks are like, what Turkish society, Turkish culture is like, and even though I don't know a whole lot about them, you do have certain prejudices or a certain image build up through like media and things like that, and that is definitely shattered through this book, where you definitely get to see a nuanced portrayal and you get to see very diverse aspects to Turkish culture, to Turkish society, to Turkish people. And so definitely in this one we get a very interesting family in which, we have very individualistic characters, very outspoken characters. You have like characters who are more linked to these sort of like spiritual to folklore elements. You have this woman who has like a good gene and a bad gene watching over her shoulders, and she does like fortune telling and things like that. So she's a lot more linked to sort of like the spiritual aspect. Then you have one who is kind of like a hypochondriac. She is constantly feeling ill and things like that. You have then the one that is kind of the rebellious daughter who owns a tattoo parlor, who has a daughter out of wedlock. And all of these aspects and all of these things, you see very diverse characters, a very diverse range of characters, clarifying that obviously all of these people are also individuals, not just, and that you cannot make a role model of Turkish society or something like that. And so that's also a reason why I really loved reading this book, really loved that sort of dive into Turkish culture, even though it's like it's not explaining you what Turkish culture is like or something like that. But you are introduced to many of its facets. You are introduced to varying degrees of the way in which people interact with that culture, the way in which people experience their culture. And, I think it is just fascinating to read Elif Shafak's work. And this one definitely was another solid one. And as I said, yeah, like, I really love this one. It really is a 5-star read. I absolutely enjoyed this one. And yeah, so happy that I read it because I am not entirely sure that I would have, prioritized picking up another Elif Shafak on my own because while I enjoyed 10 minutes 38 seconds in the Strange World, as I said, it was a little bit of a disparate, experience for me. And there are so many other books that I still want to read. There are so many writers of which I've read like one book, absolutely enjoyed it, and still need to read other books that I'm not sure I would have pushed another Elif Shafak to the front, for example. But I'm so happy that I read this one now, and I cannot make any promises for picking up more of her works anytime soon. But yes, I definitely do enjoy this experience very much, and I would not mind reading other Elif Shafak works because I've definitely had great experiences with two of her works and absolutely loved one of them. So that's gonna be it for this little reading vlog. So in total, I read 3 books out of the 6 that I have received in my Books That Matter subscription box. And I will definitely say that out of the 6 that I received, 2 of them are 5-star reads, and I enjoyed most of the other ones. The only one I didn't enjoy is one that I actually read before I got it in the Books That Matter subscription box. I consider that in terms of the books that I received, I had a great experience with Books That Matter, and I will kind of keep an eye on them in any case. But I think that my overall experience with the subscription box is that I while I is that while I like the thought of receiving these sort of like gifts and these sort of like surprises along with my books, the actual reality is that I don't really have a need for these items. And in general, I try to be a little bit more minimalistic, try not to allow myself to buy too many things that I don't actually need. And so a subscription box like that is just constantly adding things that I don't really need. So I'm going to not renew my subscription because of that. So yeah, on that note, I'm going to be ending this vlog. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was like my first little TBR tackle, a video in which I read 3 books off of my physical TBR based on a certain thematic link between all 3 of them. And I already have my second one kind of planned out. I know what I'm going to be reading, I know what the theme of it, and I'm very much looking forward to that one. So hopefully that'll be coming your way relatively soon. But the fact that I started this whole project in like March, maybe even February, and that I only finish now in towards the ending of June does not bode well. So see you guys in a couple of months with another TBR tackle, I guess. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video and see you guys for the next one. Bye!